Brandon Thurston from Wrestlenomics is up next, and we're going to follow Brandon with John Pollock from Post Wrestling.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone.
But we can't ignore the math, okay? We can't ignore the data.
Go on Google Trends, type in your name, then type in mine. You're a straight line, I'm a pyramid.
I like the very direct question on that.
Television ratings, downward spiral. Buy rates, plummeting.
The time is now to turn the math around.
Let's fucking go.
And with that, we are live, everybody. It is John Pollock and Brandon Thurston with a new era here on Pollock and Thurston.
Yes, it's new. Can everyone see us though?
That is a great question. We're not off to a great start here.
There we go.
There we go. There we go.
Fixed it. Okay.
First day on the job. Hello, everybody. Audio listeners just thought that was amazing. Video,
yeah,
maybe less to be
cool.
less desired. How are you, Brandon?
I'm fine. It was. I'm ready for a robust conversation about the TKO earnings call.
You know, my favorite part of these calls are always to determine what is the lingo. And my question to you is, I thought that we were going to go with Endeavor Flywheel, but I think
yes.
I think though the sleeper of this call was anecdote to churn.
Yes, antidote to churn.
Antidote. Sorry.
An anecdote about churn would be a story about how someone canceled their subscription.
You're
but
right.
An antidote would be the content of World Wrestling Entertainment or the Ultimate Fighting Championship.
They have the solution to churn. It is WWE and UFC programming that you cannot get enough of. So we got a multiple news dropping yesterday as we got ready for the first TKO earnings call. They dropped the press release. NXT to the CW network effective October 2024, just in time for them to go on to this call to tout a 70% increase over the average annual value of NXT on the USA network, which is unbelievable, Brandon, because we all know how much NXT was making on the USA network, don't we?
We have some ideas. Actually, I didn't even hear about this until I was voting at the time. I went to go vote, not just in the Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame, which I did, but also at my local election. And I guess I missed that deadline. Was at least one that had it out. Was PW Insider one that had it out as well?
PW Insider had a report earlier in the day that WWE was nearing the completion of a deal with the CW network. So this came several hours before the press release came out to confirm it.
Right. So anyway, as I totally missed this, and as I was reading through the earnings release that they had just put out, I figured this is kind of a dull earnings release, and we've only got 12 days of WWE because the closure of the deal for whatever accounting reason meant that they were only going to give us 12 days of WWE financials included in this TKO release. They did break out the entire 3 months for WWE, but then we got big news that NXT is going to the CW network. What is it? So it's as you said, 70% increase over their current average annual value. We've got Deadline saying 15 million. We've got Sports Business Journal's John Ourand reporting 30 to 50 million average annual value. I don't think that's right. 15 million sounds pretty believable to me. And I've asked around. I even emailed John Ourand himself. He said he was going to look into it more. So this is something that's been a curiosity since NXT really has been on the USA Network going way back to obviously October 2019. And when the deal was first announced, when they first made that move at the beginning of the Wednesday Night War, there was a question to George Barrios on an earnings call saying, does this, because you're taking this program from being on your own network where you weren't getting paid for it, obviously, there's no Peacock even at the time, you're taking it off your own network and putting it onto the USA Network. Does this contribute? Because I was looking through the archives today. Ben Swinburne, the Morgan Stanley analyst, asked George Barrios if the move of NXT to the USA Network was a meaningful contributor to profitability. George Barrios sort of just didn't answer the question and said that they're doing this for the future, which reads to me like an indirect way to say, no, this is not a big money deal. This is not a major contributor to profitability. So that was deal one, and I did this graphic, if I can show it on the screen here. So we're on to what we're in currently is the second extension of a deal between NXT and USA. So they got one extension that was announced in March of 2021 and would have began October 2021. Was that a meaningful increase? Well, an analyst asked Christina Salen, who by that time was the CFO of WWE, and asked if, does this mean that much to EBITDA, to profitability, because you got this new deal here? Basically under the impression that, before the first term was not a huge money deal. Does this renewal, this extension, mean that this is a big increase? And she said it wasn't really a big difference to profitability. I'm paraphrasing. And then we were under the impression, as of their Q4 report, which came out in February of this year, where they said that one of the meaningful one of the issues of significance on the horizon is that NXT has to be renewed. So NXT's second extension, I believe, expired just a little while ago, like early October or late September. And apparently, they're still on the air, so they must have made some sort of extension. Was that an upgrade in money? I don't know. Maybe it could have been. I don't have a quote in front of me to tell me that it was a small financial deal. Could have been bigger, but the $15 million sounds pretty believable to me. 15 times 1.7, according to my sources, is 25.5. So that's sort of where it would be. And I have a graphic for this too. So
is this a little odd in terms of just the way NXT is always handled? Is like today they have a big news to report on NXT. It's moving to a broadcast network. This is a sizable increase, and yet this extension comes and goes last month without nothing. They are able to exclude NXT in their earnings. It's like NXT is, when it's beneficial to them, they will tout something, but more often than not, it's NXT is not include. Like when we look at like average attendance and stuff, like NXT is always excluded. And I mean, is that can they continue where NXT is both trumpeted as this driver now for us? It's moving to broadcast television, yet it's also this thing that's almost like this add-on that we don't have to include with our main product.
Well, in terms of what has to be reported, I think that this is something that's, I think, part of a small but larger story that I wanted to note today, is that we're getting less insight into WWE's business, and we're no longer.
I would say way less yesterday. Like I was very underwhelmed by just the level of like what we could take away from these. I think it's a drastic step back from the usual amount of information we were privy to in these earnings calls.
Right, but I think it's something that needs to be explained for, I guess, audiences like ours, where how can they get away with not reporting X, or how can the common question is, how can they get away with reporting what they claim for the WrestleMania attendance when the paid number was smaller? It's just a matter of, in this case, is it material to your business? And what does material mean? They're a publicly traded company. The SEC is overseeing them. What do they have to report? Obviously, they don't report everything. They don't, people think because WWE is a publicly traded company, or was a publicly traded company by itself, that we would get to know what every wrestler gets paid and every bit of information we would ever want to know. It's not that at all. What they're required to report is what's material. What does material mean? That is up to interpretation. And material basically means, is it important for a reasonable investor to know this so that they can properly evaluate the value of the company? And is NXT's business that important to evaluating the value of this company? When it comes to media rights, not really relative. I mean, they don't even tell us exactly what the numbers are for Raw and SmackDown in terms of what those deals are. What they break down is, here's how much we made across the entire media segment, what we're going to call a media segment. The reason why we know what the SmackDown and the Raw deals are is because of independent reporting, where maybe they got it on background from somebody at WWE, but we don't know that because WWE has on the record said that. Although they often, as the years go by, they sort of say things that corroborate and confirm it, but we never get that directly from them.
But NXT, their rights fees would be baked into that overall number that WWE is reporting. Am I correct in that?
It would go into media, yeah, for sure, yeah.
So, I mean, like it looks to me like it was, I don't want to say insignificant, but in the grand scheme of things, like fairly insignificant. If we're talking about at a point where even if like 15 million a year. Like, think about that. That's a couple of weeks of Raw in comparison.
Yeah.
Like, this is a drop in the bucket in terms of what they're being paid. Like, you could certainly look at is NXT even profitable off of such a little amount if we're to separate this from its the WWE's core business. I mean, this has other values, but as a standalone, I mean, at 15 million a year, this is like that. We're talking like almost 30 million less than what AEW is commanding.
Right. And it's only a 2-hour program. When we look at AEW, we're talking about at this point 5 hours of weekly content. But this is, I mean, what does this say about, NXT? I mean, if we're talking about what the expenses are we talking about the entire performance center? And maybe that really has an R&D value, but are they? So I guess one question we could say is if this is worth about $26 million average annual value, are they spending less than $26 million on NXT performance center all in? Maybe. So can we call this like, hey, is this a big success? Because they went from, this was an NXT show that was on the network, and it was just something that was costing them money, and they're running some very small house shows touring around Florida. I would say this is a success, that they've gone from something that was generating relatively no revenue to something that is generating some meaningful revenue. If they are making as much as $26 million, and the larger basis would indicate more, but I don't think that's the case. But $26 million is decent.
I view this deal very, very positively. I guess it's just looking at like the USA contract itself, but it got them to this point, and maybe there's a bit of a blind spot we had towards CW Network. And when you look at how aggressively they have been towards sports programming, maybe not so surprising that they were in the mix here. Like we had seen the report from House of Wrestling, and it seems like there's a bit of confusion over what exactly the NWA's involvement with CW is or is not, because neither side has publicly commented on such a deal. But this would certainly, if history is an indicator, very hard to imagine a rival professional wrestling promotion being in business with the CW after they just announced a 5-year deal with a WWE property.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I did read Nick Hausman's report, and he makes it sound like the cocaine spot on the NWA show precipitated this NXT deal. Maybe that's the case. Does this mean that NWA is not going to have even the reality show, which I think was I was under the impression was still on the table, that the NWA reality show, not their in-ring program, that maybe that was getting pushed to the CW app, but maybe their reality show is still going to be on the network. Thinking about
which seemed to be their greatest interest, was this Billy Corgan-led reality series was what had their most attention.
Yeah, thinking of it in the context of would a network, would WWE and or a network be okay with having another wrestling property on the same network? I mean, that's an issue of contention in the MLW antitrust lawsuit, where they're alleging that this
would not be the time for WWE to be pushing exclusivity for what really would be of no risk to NXT or WWE to have another promotion involved.
Yeah, I mean, the conclusion I want to make is that I would not rule out that NWA or any other wrestling company might not have some sort of minor presence on the CW network, just because of this. I don't think NXT being on this network rules it out. Consider that is part of an issue that is related to an issue that's being raised in a lawsuit against them, antitrust lawsuit, and consider that they're under this new supervision under Ari Emanuel and Mark Shapiro, under the Endeavor executives, where they just said something last night on the earnings call about PFL, saying, "Oh yeah, we were really supportive of PFL being on ESPN, even though they're another MMA company." So I don't know that that's something that they're necessarily like allergic to, maybe like a Vince McMahon-led company might have been.
So the CW network is a broadcast network. It is technically deemed as such. This is, I would think, this is not considered one of the big four networks. But why don't you tell us a little bit about the CW network? It is in about, as I saw today, about 78 million homes. So what is that in comparison to? Is this a move up for NXT?
In terms of coverage, yes. In terms of profile, no. What's the most viewed? I did a chart earlier today showing sort of what's the average viewership of their primetime slate, and it's really small. If you go into if you visit Spoiler TV, which is reporting the broadcast ratings every day, they are including CW along with the major networks, and it does pretty small ratings. It does ratings that are sort of on the level of what Access does a lot of nights. So, and what NXT is doing currently on the USA Network is blowing away almost anything in that CW network ever puts on its air. So it's a real question to me about like what kind of viewership is NXT going to do on this network. It's available over the air. I can get it on my antenna. It's probably on every cable system, so that the coverage is a little bit higher than USA, but it's a much lower profile, I would say, television network.
This was the home of Riverdale for you fans.
This is the home of SmackDown back in the day.
That's right. SmackDown had a several-year run when UPN migrated to become a CW in the mid-2000s as well. Yeah. Brandon has like the more recent, like I was just reading today that in the 2022-23 broadcast season, they were doing a 0.1 in the demo and 548,000 viewers. Looking at like their primetime numbers from 8 till 10, I mean, they're significantly lower than that. I mean, yes, even if you are looking at not migrating fully your NXT audience at the beginning, I can't imagine they will not dwarf their regular average on the CW network.
But as far as like predicting, and this is a year away, but
Yes.
predicting what they're going to convert, I just have no idea in terms of like, should I think it's going to be smaller, the same, or higher than what they're doing currently, which is like in October, they averaged 800,000 viewers. They averaged a 0.23 in the demo. Are they going to convert all of that? Is it just going to be this notion that wrestling fans will follow you anywhere you go and they're going to retain everybody? I don't know. Or are they going to get even more viewers because they're going to have slightly greater access to the network? I just have no strong sense.
Yeah, I mean, we're a year out. What will the number of homes that CW is in a year from now? Same as USA Network. But I think two of the key questions are like at number one is, do you keep this on Tuesday nights? And that's hard to answer because we don't know what the schedule is going to look like a year from now for all of these programs, Raw, SmackDown, Dynamite. We could see a musical chairs of programming. And number two, if this increase leads WWE of the thought that is this a time to take NXT out of the Performance Center, or do we just keep these fixed costs? Like the UFC has found great success doing all of these fight night cards out of the Apex instead of like they're slowly getting back on the road more, but that has been a great savings for them, as I'm sure NXT has, being in its own building every single week. And I think the argument against it would just be, does the atmosphere affect NXT? And I don't know if there's really much to that. That would be worth such a decision to go on the road with NXT.
Yeah, I mean, don't underestimate how expensive it is to tour with a show like Raw, SmackDown, Dynamite, Collision. We're talking like $500,000 a week or something like that in production costs, and probably not enough to cover what they're getting right now, which is like 26 million. It just so happens to be that it would probably cost them about $26 million to tape a show live on the road every week. And so they'd be breaking even there. So I don't expect that. Maybe in the future, if they get a lot more money for NXT, but not anytime soon.
Also opens the chance for cross promotion with Live Golf.
Yes, it does. Certainly. Live Golf merging with the PGA, TKO, not after all, getting a minority stake in the PGA, but it does open that up. ACC football is also on CW. I think they have some other. Oh, they have NASCAR Xfinity, which is like the NXT of NASCAR. So there's that too.
So there you have it. NXT to the CW network in October of 2024. So that was a bit of a backdrop going into the very first TKO earnings call. I've got to say, Brandon, I definitely built it up in my head a lot more about the lineup of speakers we would have on this call. There was I would say none of the besides Ari Emanuel, none of the key figures. Is this the end of the Nick Khan led earnings calls? I think that's a great loss of this merger. Yeah. If we have lost Nick Khan quarterly.
Well, Pollock and Thurston is always open if he needs some outlet to speak.
Maybe you can send a text.
But yeah, did you happen to listen to the Endeavor call this morning?
I did not hear the Endeavor call. Who was on the Endeavor call?
Ari Emanuel and Mark Shapiro, and I forget their CFO's name. It's not Andrew Schleimer like it is for TKO, but no, it was very redundant. I mean, they talked about they talked a lot about TKO and just said a lot of the same things that they had said.
They could have just played a tape maybe and seen if anyone noticed. Have
I
we
think
located Brandon Ross since he was dumped? Did you hear him mid question? And they
Yes.
just like, it's like Dr. Evil hitting the button, and there he went.
Yes, but it was very much a rehash of what was said the prior evening. Yeah, I think there's definitely no Vince McMahon. There's no Nick Khan. It's just it's Endeavor is taking this over. Endeavor 51% owns TKO, and yeah, it's a separate company in a sense, but it's it's very much Ari and Mark Shapiro who are publicly facing the investors here.
I got very little from the data that was provided here. First of all, this was a third quarter earnings report that covered that 3-month period for the UFC. Do you have an explanation as to what the WWE side, it covered September 12th through September 30th? And I don't know what I'm to take from these numbers of what they generated in 3 weeks.
They did. Did you see though? They did break out. Here's July 1st and September 30th.
They did include the full thing, but this was beyond my accounting capabilities of understanding this.
So I don't know. We would need an accountant to explain it. It probably wouldn't be that exciting or interesting anyway. I'm guessing what they did was they created the hold company and they put UFC into it before September 12th, which is the day that this merger officially was completed. So I imagine UFC was in the hold company, which becomes TKO, prior to September 12th, and was probably in there by July 1st. But WWE obviously was not until the merger was officially closed on September 12th. Anyway, it won't be like this going forward, obviously, with the Q4 call, which will entail October 1st to the end of the year. We'll have the entire quarter of WWE being in there. Yeah, the operating metrics now are no longer for WWE. It's no longer attendance. We get no insight into attendance. We don't no more key performance indicators.
There was no KPI.
No KPIs. Maybe I'll have to corner the market on KPIs. None of that. The new operating metrics, rather than attendance, there's no merchandise reporting here, but the new operating metrics. Did you see them? This is how many events we run.
We're back to EBITDA. From adjusted OIBDA, we've made that big switch.
Yes, yeah. But the non-GAAP measures, the profitability measures that they report it's sort of just I include things that I want to include and don't include things that I don't want to include, and this is a financial metric that I'm using that I would like you, the investor and reader, to use to evaluate my performance. I'm going to exclude certain things that I just want to exclude. But they lost money, by the way, just because of all the costs that were associated with the closure of the merger. I don't anticipate this is going to be an unprofitable company by any means going forward. But they did report a net loss rather than a positive net income for the quarter.
How did you find, just in terms of the data that they did present? I mean, is this just like for your purposes here, like, do you see this as a significant just decrease in transparency, or do you feel that like a lot of the tone of this call was, we'll have a lot more for you in February for our next call? Like, this really did feel as though we're still in the moving in process, and by February, I think we'll get a clearer picture of things. But just what did you think in just terms of like the layout of the numbers, and is this helpful, or is this more of a hindrance when it comes to trying to get more of a analysis of each company?
I mean, yeah, it's not helpful for transparency, and for my purposes, no. But I don't feel like they're breaking SEC rules or anything, though. It's just a matter of this company is on a bigger scale now. It's sort of like, Sinclair was a publicly traded company, and people thought that, we're like, oh, do we get Ring of Honor information? No, because Ring of Honor is so small on the scale of Sinclair Broadcasting. And now WB is less than half of TKO because they valued UFC as at a higher rate slightly. So the things that are material that need to be reported are just fewer. But they did, as you alluded to, the outlook for the full year will be given next quarter. So there's no guidance. It sounded like, according to, if I interpreted Andrew Schleimer's comments correctly, that there will not be quarterly guidance, that they will just be giving annual guidance. That is, we're going to project for you what we think the financials are going to be going forward. And no news yet on capital allocation which means, among other things, no news on whether or not TKO is going to pay a dividend and how they're going to maybe do stock buybacks and some other things. So yes, more to learn 3 months from now.
Well, Ari Emanuel did address their desire to continue to look for our favorite term, cost synergies. And here is Andrew Schleimer, who was one of the speakers on the call, talking about the areas that they are still exploring when it comes to cost savings and areas that they might be able to find some overlap in. So here is Andrew Schleimer.
I would also like to provide some additional detail on the cost side. We're performing a detailed review to identify cost savings opportunities across all of TKO. We're focused on areas such as IT, marketing, finance, human resources, and legal. In addition, we're looking at overlapping personnel and revenue-generating areas such as sponsorship, media rights, and consumer products. We're also reviewing ways we can be more efficient in other areas of the business, including live events, production, and operations. We've already identified and commenced actioning upon run rate savings that, when fully realized, will allow us to achieve the upper end of the previously communicated range of 50 to 100 million in annualized savings. We anticipate realizing approximately 75% of these synergies in 2024.
All right, Andrew Schleimer, a new name to add to everyone's Google Alerts list, and another talking head that we had there. But just going over a lot of different areas that it seems as though, as much like I got the impression like they are not done necessarily with cuts. We saw all the cuts that went down back in September, but it would seem like that's still an area that they are in the process of evaluating and finding this overlap that they can continue to have hit the high guidance of what they had set out to make.
Yeah, it's not particularly reassuring, I guess, if you're a WWE employee and wondering if maybe there's another round coming, but I don't think that changed that expectation either.
There was also a huge emphasis on site fees for their big events. And of course, UFC has enjoyed many of these for years. WWE is aggressively getting into this. And specific, they mentioned multiple times that the Elimination Chamber show in Perth next February would be the largest site fee that WWF has ever received for an event, which I have a hard
more
time.
Than $50 million.
Well, I have to imagine that they do not recognize these Saudi Arabia shows as being quote unquote site fees, because it would make absolutely no sense for the government of Australia to be spending anywhere near $50 million for a standalone WWE event. So I would imagine Saudi Arabia is in its own category.
Yeah, it must be, I don't know, propaganda fee or something like that. But yeah, it's I think sort of one of the overall themes here is that, and I think you could say this started when Nick Khan came to the company and when they changed the strategy from doing the network direct to consumer to licensing it, that this is a company that's become about licensing, about selling the rights to various things, whether that's TV, whether that's our network, whether that's just the right to have our show in your local area and bring all the benefits to it that it's going to bring. And that's something that I gather UFC has been doing for a while as well.
Well, it's going to be something that they continue to go after in a big way. And then, of course, Raw was a big topic of discussion. So first, we'll just hear from Mark Shapiro, who responded to Brandon Ross about the concerns when it comes to live sports rights, and if they could be in trouble if WWE or UFC are seeing this, and whether they are concerned.
The state of sports rights and the dollars being spent on sports rights remains in a very strong, robust position. And to Ari's point, we're in the middle of this. It is strong and robust for us too. Raw is a very healthy property. Not only are ratings up, it's got a lot of equity to it. It's got longevity. It's got brand affinity. It's got super fandom. And we're going to take our time with this. We have until next October. We can flip the switch, just to remind you, because we do all the production. So we can literally move, from one network to a new partner overnight.
We can do it all. Mark Shapiro, definitely the guy that I think has the best presentation skills that we had on this call.
I thought about that while listening to him. You really think he's a good speaker here? I don't disagree. It just didn't occur to me.
He also, in enough interviews I've heard, I think he's open enough that, I mean, his background is like, this guy worked at ESPN. He's less, I would say, rigid when it comes to his, like, everything has to be close to the vest and I'm watching what I'm saying. He seems to be a bit more of a human being sometimes in some of these interviews, which I appreciate. Certainly, yeah, to me, he's no Nick Khan. I'm going to state that. I'm very down on the fact that these Nick Khan quarterly appearances look to be done.
Yeah. So one thing I took away from that comment was that, so I put out all these questions the other day saying, here's some questions that I think would be good to ask. And one of them was, does the fact that you're going to have to wait, presumably, until after the NBA deal is done, which might not be until the summer, if they're going to, it's going to be at least after May, I would think, because they're going to wait until the exclusive negotiating window has ended, which will be at the end of the NBA season, which is in May. So and then it's going to take them a little while after that to get a deal done. So maybe a deal doesn't get done until summer, maybe later than that. And the WWE Raw deal is going to end in October. So is there any risk to having to put the show on a new network with such a quick turnaround? And he makes it sound like, no, there's not. We can do it overnight. We can make it happen real fast. My questions would be around, like, is there any risks that presents to making ad sales if you don't know 3 months in advance that you've got this show? But I suppose that would wash out in a quarter of a year anyway.
It's one, like, they have continually stressed the fact that Raw, all of their programming, it is something that is, first of all, it's you cannot be wrought with fears of churn. First of all, that's number one. Number two, very flexible. We can move overnight. We can go to any network. We can go to any time. We're that flexible. And number three, I would state that the other, like, big takeaway here was their emphasis. Like, we are going to be very patient when it comes to Raw. Like, I don't think anyone is holding their breath for a Raw renewal this year, and possibly till like next summer into the fall. Like, this could be one that is a real buzzer beater for them when we're talking this time, end of September. Like, we're less than a year away. And if they're somewhat held up until these NBA rights are completed, like, the NBA isn't going to be speeding up their process for the benefit of all the other programming that wants to figure out their deals. I almost wonder if there will get to a point where they try to get a short-term extension with NBC Universal. I think, like, as we get closer to the summer and there's no deal, I could certainly see that being something on the table for them to at least get through football season or something like that.
Yeah, that's been a theme with these smaller deals. Apparently NXT getting an extension of apparently 1 year. The Hulu rights have apparently been extended because they're still on Hulu. So yeah, and I think that's similar for AEW in that they're waiting for NBA rights to be done too, so that we can see who are the suitors. I mean, I don't expect AEW to go anywhere but WBD, but so that we can see who the suitors are, who are the people who don't have NBA at that point or have less NBA than they have currently. What are the nights that are available that don't have NBA on them? And where do all the other wrestling shows go? And do we end up with any WWE versus AEW head-to-head there? And how much money is left after all the spending is completed on the NBA? Yeah, I think that's something that we could see happen, is that there might be maybe a short-term extension. I mean, I think so much of what we've seen so far has been, nobody predicted, SmackDown was going to go to NBCU, and credit to Lavi Margolin for bringing up CW as a potential home for wrestling like a year ago. But yeah, I mean, nobody expected NXT to go to the CW. So I just hesitate to make any predictions about where Raw is going to go and how it's going to end up.
HGTV lands Raw.
Right. Discovery. That would be Discovery. Yes.
That is what we could be potentially looking at. Yeah, it's very interesting to look. JP Morgan had put out an analysis this week, and they had, like, the four suitors that I think a lot of people are looking at. Disney with their idea, this being JP Morgan's, of landing Raw on FX with the potential of a third hour that could be exclusive to Hulu. And then the other candidates being Warner Brothers Discovery, on the caveat that, is Fox Sports still interested in pro wrestling and going after the AEW product that would be at a great savings over what SmackDown was earning, much less what their increase was, the asking price for. Amazon Prime And then fourth being NBC Universal, which the way they couched it was almost this, like if all things are equal, they have NBC Universal. That would seem like they do not want to interrupt their Monday night programming. But I mean, WWE wants to be open to some offer that could just blow away everybody else. And I don't know if that offer is going to come Raw's way. We will see.
Yeah. I mean, Amazon Prime Video was what many, and on some weeks I was predicting for SmackDown. So I think Amazon Prime Video is still a real player. I guess I don't think Netflix is going to end up with it, but Netflix does seem to be taking some real steps into sports. They're doing a golf tournament. So they've always said, we don't want to license sports. We're interested in owning sports, but they've said a lot of things that they've gone back on, including, having an ad tier and things like that. So yeah, I have no idea where Raw will be or what night it will be on a year from now.
Mike Jennings, we thank you very much for the super chat. Enjoying the show. Informative as always. Well, we try, Mike. If you want to send in any super chats, if you have any questions or maybe predictions, you are welcome to send them in as we continue to discuss the rights and coming out of the earnings call. So the call, as we mentioned, it was about 40 minutes. I think they took 5 questions on this earnings call.
Not many. Not many this morning.
Ari had to get going, man. He had better things to be doing. It's like one more question. Like we got to get out of here. I think Mark Shapiro took off his whole night. He was ready to take questions into the sunset.
Yeah. Did you notice? I think the prepared remarks were recorded in advance. It sounded because Ari Emanuel sounded very different in his prepared remarks versus when he was doing Q&A.
He did sound very prepared. I re-listened to it this morning, going through clips, and it was a distinct difference in his opening remarks versus his answers, where it was also very interesting. Like when Ari would answer something, like Mark Shapiro would then follow it up. What Ari's trying to say or something like that. It's like he would add the context after he felt the answer needed a bit more clarity, which maybe that was just me reading into things here. But yeah, it was any other of the big topics that you saw coming out of this. I do want to play this thought on their competition. Maybe let's play that first, and then we can react. This is Mark Shapiro addressing the PFLs, the Bellators of the world, and how TKO views other promotions, other leagues out there.
Yeah, look, the investment that SRJ made in PFL, we look at to our advantage. We have no issue with Bellator, PFL, name your league. To Ari's point, competition is good. Not only do we have over 600 fighters, we have the premier fighters. I mean, ultimately, you're trying to get to the UFC, which is akin to the XFL trying to ultimately get their players into the NFL. I mean, that's what we are. Those are pipeline and feeder properties. In fact, we're supportive of them being on ESPN. PFL's been on ESPN. We were totally supportive of that deal. And the Saudi experience should prove out well for us, and I think prove something to every investor on this call. Because when it first came out, it was a lot of what's going on. They're coming after us. They're going to take fighters out. They're going to increase fighter pay. UFC's in trouble. And then quickly on the heels of that, we announced our deal. So good for them. Saudi Arabia is being very aggressive in bringing events to the kingdom. They're in discussions on the WTA finals for tennis. They're looking obviously at motorsports. There's rumors about their potential investment in F1. All kinds of stuff that are out there right now. All we know is they want more MMA, which is great for us. And the more they have, the more it's really just going to serve as an appetizer to what will be the meal, which is UFC.
The meal, the main course, Brandon. Yes. So, anyone worried about, they're going to increase fighter pay, don't you worry. We have got them under our thumb for years to come. There is nothing that's going to interrupt our.
If you're a UFC fighter listening, you better save your money.
Don't even think about it for a second. But yeah, competition is good. We love competition, and if you're listening, Judge Richard Bulware, competition is great. We love it. Don't think we need a trial in April.
Yeah. Did you see the? I didn't really think much of this, but I guess I didn't really see it. But the aggregators are making a story of there's a risk factor listed, must be in the 10Q, that says Vince McMahon being on the board is itself a risk factor. Now there's dozens and dozens of risk factors. It's not like this was one thing that was specifically called out among nothing else. There's a lot of other things mentioned here, but the filing says his membership on the board could lead to negative publicity and or have other adverse financial and operational impacts. There could be additional scrutiny or otherwise could exacerbate the other risks described herein. I did search for his name right away when we got the 10Q, and there was no update or like further insight into the grand jury investigation that's happening around him, apparently. But it was mentioned that there are subpoenas and things of that nature. It led me to believe that this grand jury investigation is still ongoing, that they would still mention it. They still mention the MLW lawsuit in this filing, which is a lawsuit that's still ongoing. So it's not something that is a matter of the past. It is still happening.
Yeah, it was. First of all, I think it's, yes, they're listing it as a risk factor. I don't, unless there is like some other shoe to drop with Vince McMahon, I think that is just more so a worst case scenario. And I don't see there being a whole lot of negativity towards Vince McMahon's involvement on the board of directors in this current state. Now, if there are some indictments
I think he could be indicted. And if he's indicted, that's bad publicity.
Then that's the shoe that drops. And then this becomes a much bigger case. And then, it really does become sort of the issue, like how much of a risk factor is this for TKO to be aligned with someone in an active investigation by the government that is, looking at the potential of an indictment. The other one being the antitrust case against the UFC, which now has a trial date set for April the 8th of next year, which, unless there is a settlement between now and then, the roads have pretty much been cleared to go towards this trial. This was brought up in the earnings report, but it was, I am somewhat amazed that it is not more on the radar of some of the analysts out there. And just given the amount of attention that the PFL investment got, as I've said before, I'm just surprised that this antitrust suit is not something that is more of concern now that there is a clearer path towards a trial. And in a best case scenario, you have a settlement which would go into the millions and millions of dollars, much less treble damages that they could face for this trial.
So if there was a settlement or if there was any kind of payout, I would think that they would have insurance that would help cover that. I think a bigger question that I would have is there could, as a result of this lawsuit, could there be any, could they be forced to pay fighters more or something like that? Would there be any lasting
contracts,
financial impact because of this? And that's something that should raise uncertainty to the stock value.
Yeah, and thus far, it is not. How did the stock react on Tuesday and today, Brandon, to this news? It seems largely unchanged.
And so the NXT deal is a relatively small deal on the scale. Certainly it's a small deal on the scale of WWE. It's a small deal, certainly on the scale of TKO when you add in UFC. But the stock price is down 1% today, whereas the indexes are basically flat. There's a very small movement on any of the indexes today. Endeavor is up 1%. So WBD had their report this morning too, and reported that their ad revenue is lower than expected. So the TV ad market is facing challenges, and cord cutting is facing challenges. But
did you listen to the WBD call?
I listened to part of it. I listened to the latter, 20 minutes or so. I did. I got my fill of Mr. Zaslav and Gunnar this morning.
Did he refer to Mr. Khan at all during the hour-long call?
No, he didn't. He didn't talk about AEW. You know what that means? If AEW is such a big deal, how come David Zaslav's not talking about him every second?
Well, we can. Any closing thoughts just on the earnings call and just any other topics that came out? Like I thought there was some key indicators in terms of like what their prime objectives are, and essentially this is setting the table for 2024, where they feel there is tons of ways to exploit all of this IP to open up WWE to further sponsorships. Vince McMahon has taken his hands off the wheel when it comes to his protection of the sacred mat and the WWE arena.
Yes.
Plaster every logo, put every image up. Let's just go to town. Zombies are just step one, and they're just going to go and further attract sponsorships and get governments to pay for their events.
Yeah, I think it was like we said, there's going to be a little more next quarter in terms of they'll at least have a full quarter of WWE to include here, and we'll break them down into their 4 big segments, which, do I remember them, are media, live events, sponsorship, and consumer product licensing. So there'll be a tiny bit more of insight next quarter. There'll be some guidance on what they think they're going to make, the entire TKO organization is going to make for the year of 2024. Maybe there'll be some news next time about capital allocation and dividends. Sounds exciting. And our time of having, some comments from WWE executives every 3 months is over. It's totally up to whether or not they just make media appearances or not going forward. We're just going to hear from the overlords at Endeavor going forward, I guess.
Yeah, it could be the end of an era in terms of the run that they had, from the Linda McMahon hosted calls to the George Barrios hosted calls. Vince was definitely the best, because you could just get Vince flying off the handle on some of these calls. I mean, he was, for all we want to say about Vince McMahon, there were times he would be brutally honest on these calls. I always
think you've
remember
been listening to them longer than I have then.
I mean, I was listening to them pretty early on, as I recall. I definitely remember the one right after the announcement that the XFL was going to be shelved.
Wow.
And he just, like, he was not putting any of the blame on anyone other than this failed. It did not work. Like, he was very contrite in terms of this being the 2001 version of the XFL, not the follow-up ones. But yeah, you would see, like, when there was a rough quarter, I mean, Vince McMahon, he was generally, like, he would be pretty steadfast in terms of just, we're not presenting a product that people are wanting. And you would get sometimes some like very clear answers that were not sugar-coated. It was always interesting to hear Vince on these calls.
Yeah, I found archives going back to 2011, but no earlier than that, I think. I would be really curious to hear, because it's been a publicly traded company since October 99. So be really curious to hear what those other the earlier conference calls sound like.
The early ones, I would literally like star one and try to get in on
really
calls. Yeah, but amazingly, I was never called upon. But I did try in the early days.
I will take issue with one more thing that Ari Emanuel said in the context of NXT and putting over this NXT deal. He said that 90% of the WrestleMania roster this year was from NXT.
Oh yeah.
And I did a quick look just before we went on the air here, and I took out a notepad and I was like, I can get to more than half, I would say, did not get most of their wrestling experience from NXT.
What are you talking about? Kevin Owens debuted in 2014. Shinsuke Nakamura, he's only been wrestling 7 years.
Right. Sami Zayn, Drew McIntyre, Sheamus. And then there's like the edge cases, like on what side of the fence should you put Logan Paul, Ronda Rousey, who maybe they did some stuff at the Performance Center, but we're certainly never in NXT.
So you're disputing 90% from NXT.
I'm definitely disputing 90%. Yes.
Well, let's talk about just a couple of ratings notes before we wrap things up. I want to go back to this past weekend, so we'll just go in order here. SmackDown was back on Fox. They did 2,119,000 viewers, 0.53 in the demo. This was a taped edition of the show with half the crew in Saudi Arabia. So they were down 6% in viewership from 2 weeks prior on Fox after the 1 week on FS1. Rampage that same night, 298,000 viewers, which I believe the second lowest viewership in its normal time slot ever for Rampage. However, the demo was up 23% this week at a 0.11. So, I mean, they did have a bit of a younger audience for Rampage, but not a great viewership figure. And then the most focused upon, would you say Collision are the most, like, what are you getting the most engagement on these days, Brandon, when it comes to numbers? Do you think Collision is the hot button number that is most debated, discussed, analyzed each week?
I guess so. Collision, because it's new and,
there's been such fluctuation with it. I mean, it's one where, I mean, all of these shows, like, we're not seeing crazy changes, but Collision is one that, I mean, depending on the week, I mean, you can see, like, here we had 366,000 viewers this week and a 0.09. And like, this was really noteworthy. We still don't have the college football numbers, do we, from Saturday night?
No, Sports TV Ratings has not reported any Saturday or Sunday data yet. So we don't know, but it did appear like I would start making this argument that even when there's a PLE from WWE that's earlier in the day, doesn't even have to be head to head. It appears to have an impact on Collision with people.
I think this confirms it, Brandon. I mean, you called this right away. I think this confirms it. Regardless of I think there was an Alabama game going on, regardless of what a college football, there were several games. I don't think any audience, unless it was just something absurd, could justify this being down and not citing Crown Jewel as a factor when you get a 3.5-hour show and your audience is not coming back for wrestling that many hours later on a Saturday night. So I think it 100% is a contributing factor at this point. This was the third lowest Collision in history.
That's what third, fourth. If we're talking about total viewership, I see 3 others that are lower here. Demo might have been a different story, but yeah, no, I think it was Bix. I remember Bix floating this idea about Money in the Bank having an effect, and I figured nah. But then you see this. I didn't. And then we saw some more weeks where we really saw what the head-to-head competition did, and it really seemed to have been similar to the impact that the day of Money in the Bank had. And here we've got another earlier in the day, and there's going to be more of these, right? I mean. Elimination Chamber will be at some time in Australia, and there's going to be the Berlin show. That'll be another afternoon show next year, and God, we'll see how much of an impact WrestleMania has on this when it goes head to head, presumably next year.
Yeah, one difference: the Money in the Bank show, that was also a taped edition of Collision. So this, we at least saw a live Collision. If you feel that made any kind of a difference, that would be the only difference between this one. Yeah. And then Raw Monday night, 1,522,000 viewers, up 9% from last week and doing a 0.47 in the demo. So again, Nielsen has been delayed this week, so we don't know what Monday Night Football did, but it seemed like this was a bounce back after last week going against both NFL games or both Monday Night Football and the World Series. So baseball is out of the way. And they did 286,000 viewers in Canada, Brandon. Their highest number since August 21st in Canada. Huge number for Canadians that were tuning in.
And this was one of the higher ratings of the year in the US, or of the NFL season, I should say, in the US as well.
And I don't believe we have a NXT number yet, but that will be coming. Brandon's the only person we can fully depend upon for numbers.
Well, the delays I understand are with broadcast, so that's why we have a Raw number, but we do not have what Monday Night Football did on ABC. I imagine the ESPN numbers are out there somewhere. I don't have them though. We do have an NXT number. Do you want it?
Yeah, let's hear. So first of all, last week NXT, for comparison points, this was on Halloween night, did 674,000 viewers, 0.20 for Halloween Havoc night 2.
So 794,000 viewers total.
That's really strong for them. That's
0.26 in the demo. 0.26 in the demo.
That's a very good number for a show that was not built around anything that sizable for the show. So I would look at that that was a very good number for NXT.
Right. So yeah, I'll have to start punching that into the big spreadsheet. But yeah, that's a pretty good number. But yeah, I guess the cable has not been delayed, I think, at any point. But yeah, we're still delayed on sort of understanding what the college football did and everything else that was on broadcast over the weekend.
All right. And last super chat here from Justin Roberts. Been a while since I've had the chance to watch live. Thank you both for all of the hard work. Well, thank you, Justin, for tuning in, catching us live, where we are each and every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern time. Is Brandon muted? No, he is Brandon is in ratings mode right now as he is preparing to put out the NXT numbers. But that's going to bring an end to this week's edition of Pollock and Thurston. We will be back next week. As always, you can go catch Wrestlenomics each and every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern time. This week up at patreon.com/Wrestlenomics. They did a free show this past week with Brandon and Jesse Collings. And as Brandon noted, you did vote on Tuesday, did you not, Brandon? Oh, you are still muted.
Do you hear me now?
Now I can hear you. Yes.
I did vote on Tuesday.
I'm getting you. Your voice has now changed, though.
Okay. Let me fix some stuff.
Okay. Well, I was going to ask him about voting in the Observer Hall of Fame, but both of us voted this past Tuesday. Results should be out in several weeks, and I'm sure we will spend some time going over the results of the Observer Hall of Fame. But do tune in to Wrestlenomics this coming Sunday, and tonight, Rewind to Dynamite with myself and Wei Ting. We will be live at 10 p.m. Eastern Time up at youtube.com/postwrestling, and then we're putting out an edition of Talk on Thursday, where Wei and I, you'll never believe it, we're going to talk, and that will be up at postwrestlingcafe.com. Perfect. You're coming in clear. I was asking you did the double vote on Tuesday.
I did. I voted for, let's see if I can remember while I find the tweet, CM Punk. But just wait. Roman Reigns.
Oh my gosh.
If you're not mad at me yet, Young Bucks. As well as Beauty Pair, Tomohiro Ishii, Reg Parks, and Jim Johnston. I think that's everybody.
You had a very concise ballot this year. I like it.
I'm a stingy voter. I don't vote for many people.
I went this year. I did have a larger ballot this year with the added categories and how you could go. So my ballot was as follows, and this is breaking news, by the way. I saved it for this show. Argentina Rockin', Miguel Perez, Johnny Rougeau, Sergeant Slaughter, the British Bulldogs, and Wild Bull Curry in the historical candidates. Modern performers, the Briscoe brothers, Mark and Jay, the Young Bucks, Paul Orndorff, CM Punk, and Roman Reigns. Japanese section, the Beauty Pair, Tomohiro Ishii, Shingo Takagi, and then non-wrestlers, Dave Brown, Bobby Bruns, Bobby Davis, and Morris Siegel that was my ballot. So Tuesday, that was the vote.
Today is
I didn't get the sticker. No.
Dave didn't give you a sticker, huh?
No.
With a Canadian flag or something.
I think you could get a sticker, or you can print it out on your home computer now.
You know, there's usually a fax option that's on the ballot. There's no fax option this year. I was disappointed.
Oh,
I couldn't fax in my vote.
Were you a big at any time getting the physical copy of the Observer, because now
of course.
It's the end of it is the end of the physical copy era of the Observer. It will now be just digital, which I haven't got a hard copy in over a decade.
Of waiting to see whether my tapes were going to show up in the mail, whether my Observer was going to show up in the mail. Those were the days. And then there was at some point, do you remember this, where it used to be stapled, and then he changed it to like the sticker tab because it was a fold over. See, I'm proving that I really got it. It would be folded over, and for the longest time it was stapled at the top. And then at some point in the mid 2000s, it became like a white circle sticker that would bind it together.
Man, the history of the mailing process. I'm amazed he went as long as he did with the hard copy version. I mean, that had to have been a giant pain. But there you go. You can check out your Observer newsletter and whatever form of media you so desire. But that's going to wrap it up for us. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. Thank you for the super chats. Thanks for tuning in live. We are back next Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern time. What will be going on in the wrestling world next week? Who should know? Maybe we will have TV deals to discuss. Maybe we will have God knows what else will be dropping over the next 7 days. But we will keep you up to date. Go up, Wrestlenomics.com, postwrestling.com. And that is it for this week's edition of Pollock